Today here on The Bottom Line, we're going to take a look at a true story of some really remarkable feats of, I think, strength and service and sacrifice, and also a supernatural intervention as well. Larry Smith is joining me here on the program today. We're going to talk about a brand new book called Trouble, which is a true story about a group of guys in the Air Force, January the 7th, 1944, and what happened with, you're going to find out what trouble is all about. Larry Smith, welcome to The Bottom Line Show today.
Thank you very much, Roger. I appreciate you having me.
Well, we appreciate the work that you've done in this brand new book. We've got a link for it up at thebottomlineshow.com. Let's get the easy question out of the way first. Why did you call the book Trouble?
That was the nickname of the plane that they were flying the day they were shot down.
Okay. That's an easy answer. It's easy to understand. Now, typically, there were long names and sometimes commission names and things. How did they come up with the nickname of Trouble?
Actually, I don't believe that this crew named the plane. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the way things operated, especially in that time. The crews were assigned different planes at different times, and many of the early missions for this crew were on a different plane. Okay. As a matter of fact, one of the planes they crashed. This incident is in the book. It crashed in a beet field, and it was destroyed or basically used for scrap after that. So the fact that they were on Trouble was simply an assignment that they had that day. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Okay, let's talk about the focal point here, not only the plane, but of course Sergeant Robert Sweatt, and that's spelled S-W-E-A-T-T. Talk about, first of all, give us a little bit of background as to how this story came your way.
I married Robert's oldest daughter.
So this is a family tale that you've been hearing for quite some time.
Yes, I have. I've been listening to it for many, many years. Uh-huh. And I have to tell you, in the early part of my relationship with this family, I sometimes questioned, wow, this sounds a little hard to believe. Uh-huh. But I have, by way of research and by learning that Mr. Robert Sweatt is a very honest man, I've come to trust his word. And I know also by fact of released military documents that the things that are in this book are absolutely true. Larry Smith is with me today here on The Bottom Line. I'm Roger Marsh. We're talking about his new book called Trouble, which is literally a story about this incredible journey going back to January the 7th, 1944. We've got a link for the book up at thebottomlineshow.com. I'm thrilled to hear because, let's face it, a lot of people will hear a story, like this, and it'll start with, oh, there goes Grandpa telling a story again, and I realize that if it never went any further than that, it just becomes part of the family lore. But something motivated you, something moved you to say, hey, I want to get all of the facts. I want to verify the things that need to be verified and then share the story with people. What was the driving force for you in getting this thing into print? It is an amazing story, but my main purpose in writing is to share the story and remember the men who died that day, mm-hmm. and the people who helped Robert escape and evade, the French people, farmers, who helped him survive. Mm-hmm.
And when let's get that leads us perfectly into getting a little background on the story here. I encourage listeners to go to thebottomlineshow.com and hit the link for Trouble, and you can learn more about actually getting the book. January 7th, 1944, he's in this bomber jet nicknamed Trouble that gets shot down over, you mentioned the French people. There was some Nazi occupation there when they were shot down. Let's get into the particulars of what happened that day, because he sustained some pretty serious injuries.
He was very injured, multiple wounds, some of them very serious. As a matter of fact, he didn't know this immediately, but he had a nick to his jugular vein.
Oh, no.
We do not know exactly when that wound occurred, mm-hmm. But obviously sometime during the attack on the bomber, the B-24 Liberator, by the way.
Okay. what happens when something like, I mean, we nowadays we see stories of men and women who are in combat and they get hit with something, and it seems like more and more people are coming back with wounds and PTSD and things like that to deal with. Back in Sergeant Sweat's day, it was a different story. You got hit with something like that, your chances of survival were very, very slim compared to the technology that we have today. With those kinds of wounds, who were the heroes? Who were the angels that stepped in and said, we're going to help this guy?
He makes the statement and has so for many, many years. God had his hand on me that afternoon is the way he phrases it. And many miracles occurred. Let me start with the initial attack.
Okay.
There's a fairly short sequence where he is trying to put his parachute on, but his left arm and hand have stopped working. We find out later that that's because he was wounded in his left forearm, and a pretty serious wound there.
Yeah.
A chunk of bone was missing, as a matter of fact.
Ouch.
Yes, and so he's struggling to get his parachute on, and the plane is basically disintegrating. Robert sees the right wing fly past the waist gun window. He only sees the tip of it, but in fact the whole wing was separated.
My goodness.
Because of the loss of the wing, the plane begins to fall, and it threw Robert over to the other side. He was actually thrown almost through the window, but was caught. The plane begins to spin, and centrifugal force is building. Robert can't breathe, as a matter of fact. And that's when the plane explodes, and it knocks him unconscious. He regains consciousness some seconds later. We really don't know how many seconds. But his first thought is, so this is what it feels like to be dead.
Right. I'll bet.
And he eventually realizes, well, I'm not dead yet. And so he begins to try to take care of himself. And the first thing he checks is his parachute, which he had not been able to complete snapping beforehand. Well, now it's in place. Everything is snapped. It's on the harness correctly.
And he didn't remember having done that.
He cannot explain how that happened.
Wow, there's that hand of God showing up again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He still can't pull the ripcord, though, because he has 3 pair of gloves on his right hand, and his left hand is still not working, so he has to use his teeth to pull the gloves off.
Incredible.
So he can pull the ripcord. So, by the way, I'm skipping an awful lot.
I was going to say, this is if your appetite has been whet by hearing Larry Smith talk about this remarkable story of Sergeant Robert Sweat, I encourage you to go to thebottomlineshow.com and get the link is here for the book Trouble. We put that up at the Bottom Line Show. About 90 seconds before our first break here, Larry, go ahead and continue with. I mean, right now, literally, you've got us hanging in midair trying to get the ripcord pulled. So please continue.
So as he pulls the ripcord, he feels the tug of the parachute. It does open. And that's when he notices the blood spurting from the left side of his neck.
The jugular wound, yeah.
Yes, it's in time with his heartbeat. He knows it's a jugular. So he literally reaches up. He holds the side of his neck with his good hand, his right hand, and begins to wait until he hits the ground. When he hits the ground, he begins the things that he's been trained to do. Finally, he realizes or notices some mud between his legs. He reaches down, grabs a handful of mud, and packs the wound
with
to
mud.
Stop the bleeding.
Oh my gosh, how resourceful is that? I mean, this is incredible. We're coming up on a break here, but don't go anywhere. Larry Smith is with me today here on The Bottom Line, writing the incredible story of his father-in-law, Sergeant Robert Sweat. It's a World War II story and a tale called Trouble, which is a nickname for one of the 5 bombers that were shot down that day in France in January 7th of 1944. The Nazi occupation was there. The place was teeming with Hitler's people. The fact that this guy had been shot down in a bomber and is now literally packing mud into his neck to stop the bleeding in his jugular vein. What happens next? Obviously, he survived. We're going to get a brief synopsis of what happened as he survived not only the attacks on the ground, but also just his own physical health. We'll talk about that in just a moment as The Bottom Line continues. Fascinating story today here on The Bottom Line. I'm Roger Marsh. You're listening to The Bottom Line show on God and Country stations all across the western United States. And this is one of those stories where we hear about the hand of God working with a man of God who was fighting against evil in the world. And that man, Sergeant Robert Sweat, is being profiled in a brand new book by Larry Smith, one of his sons-in-law. The book is called Trouble, and we've got a link for the book up at thebottomlineshow.com. And I'm just, as you were sharing and just really giving us a 35,000-foot view of his story, I mean, obviously you can't, it takes more than 10 minutes to tell what happened when he was shot down in that bomber and how he landed. But now he finds himself basically in France. It's Nazi-occupied. He's wounded severely. I mean, it may have, without God's intervention, it may have even been a mortal wound. And now, I guess the big question is, now what? What was it like for him once he hit the ground?
He was obviously very concerned and was immediately thinking of trying to hide. Mm-hmm. So he began to pull off the military uniform pieces, throwing away the insignias and things of that nature that would give him away immediately. Mm-hmm. He also threw away the Mae West. He threw away. He pulled off his flight boots, which were big, heavy boots as well, and he left his parachute. He was told to bury the parachute, but the ground was so frozen that he couldn't do that, and he began walking. He was lucky enough to have missed the trees nearby, mm-hmm. and he recognized the local area as a field. He saw a couple of stacks of what he thought was hay, and he went towards those and climbed inside. When he did, he immediately noticed the smell of animal dung, so he realized it was a mixture of hay and manure. And so he was hiding in that. And the reason I mentioned that is because the Germans used dogs later, mm-hmm. and it's highly likely that his choice of hiding in the manure piles there hid his scent enough mm-hmm. because the dogs did not find him.
Interesting. Well, the dogs didn't find him because perhaps the manure, but also, as you mentioned earlier, Larry, the hand of God kind of brushing them aside and saying, "Go look for somebody else. Don't look for this. Yeah, leave this one alone." You know.
Yes.
Oh, what a wonderful story. Okay, continue.
Okay. As he was in the pile of hay and manure, he noticed some men coming towards him. And they obviously were looking for him. Mm-hmm. And he began to, he was fearful that it might be Germans, but he didn't see any uniforms. And so as they got closer, he moved the hay aside. One of the men spotted him and said, "Anglais." And he said, "No, American." Mm-hmm. So they pulled him out of the pile, and a man named Andre Picard, actually a fairly young man at that time, had been working in the fields that day and had multiple layers of clothes on to protect against the cold. Mm-hmm. And Andre gave Robert a beret, a scarf, a pair of pants, and a coat. And he also spit in his handkerchief and used that to wipe the blood off of Robert's face.
So basically he turned him into a member of the French countryside within a matter of minutes. Wow.
And he looked the same as the other men standing there.
Mm-hmm. So that now Hitler's guys wouldn't have any reason to go after someone like him because of the fact that they figured he just wasn't an American soldier who was trying to shoot them down. He was masquerading basically as a Frenchman who
exactly.
was wow.
In fact, a few moments later, a German soldier came up with a machine gun, one of those short submachine guns.
Yeah.
And Robert didn't realize this at the time because he obviously didn't understand German. But the German soldier was yelling at them. He was told 25 years later that by the French people who rescued him that the German was saying, "We saw that flyer come down. We saw his parachute. We know he's around here. Now you go and find him." And they had a big laugh when they told Robert about this because they said, "You were told to go looking for yourself."
I love it. I love it. Larry Smith is with me today here on The Bottom Line. I'm Roger Marsh. The book is called Trouble. We've got a link for it up at thebottomlineshow.com. The fascinating true story of Sergeant Robert Sweatt, S-W-E-A-T-T, who was what exactly specifically, did you say he was a waist gunner? What did that mean?
That he manned the 50 caliber machine guns near the middle of the plane, and he was on the right side. Harold Saunders, his good friend, was on the left side of the plane.
Okay, so that was their position on this bomber.
Yes.
And then they were shot down. So basically now we've got him in France. We've got about 4 minutes left in our conversation here. So obviously we're going to get up to present day here. How André Picard played a role in helping this guy, find safety at least, and go look for himself when the Nazis were there. How was he ultimately liberated, rescued?
There was a famous escape route named the Shelburne Escape Line. There are many books about that line as a matter of fact. And I again, there are so many things between that first day on the ground and getting connected with the Shelburne Escape
But
Line.
please know, if you're listening to this conversation, we are just scratching the surface. You really need to take a look at this book called Trouble, which we've got a link for up at thebottomlineshow.com. But please continue.
Okay. And effectively, they went through a place called the House of Alphonse, which was one of the last places he was in France. As they left that place, there were 26 men, Allied airmen, who had been gathered together. This was the fifth and final operation of the Bonaparte portion of the Shelburne Escape Line, because it was nearing D-Day, and they wanted to stop. They were worried about raising awareness of the beaches there. Let's see, real quickly, he walked through some heavily guarded areas. He was led through a minefield on a moonless night, by the way. He had to climb down more than 200 feet on a cliff near the beach. Then there were several resistance members helping him during this operation, obviously, and they brought 4 surf boats and loaded the 26 men plus the men that were already in there. There was a total of 38 men in 4 boats. They rowed them out to a PT-style boat, a British PT-style boat, and put them on board. They still had to get away from the shore without being noticed, and that took quite some time.
Not bad.
But then they turned the coals on those diesel engines and took them to England.
Wow. Fascinating. It's an amazing tale, and obviously we could spend hours talking about obviously what happened after he got back, stateside, and what the life has been like. Larry, for you, I mean, I commend you for hearing this story so many times and kind of putting aside your own, I don't want to say cynicism, but I mean, naturally, it's kind of like, okay, this is kind of a tall tale. God really must have gotten a hold of you at some point. Robert keeps saying, God had his hand on me every step of the way here. It sounds like God helped you in terms of, doing the research, being able to tell this story in kind of a sensible way, and then to get this book written.
I had a lot of help. Many of the people in France or relatives of theirs or friends of theirs, as a matter of fact, helped me do research. The Allied and Axis military documents were declassified. I found out so much through other people and really just put it together. You know, a lot of people have said to me that you did a great job, Larry. I'm sorry. All I did was take what I was told and what I read and put it together. The story was written by the people in the story.
Well put. Very, very well put. Well, the book is called Trouble. I highly recommend it to you. The author, Larry Smith, has been my guest today here on The Bottom Line. We've got a link for the book up at thebottomlineshow.com, and also I know we can follow you on social media, too. There's some Facebook connectable points for people as well, and we can go ahead and link those up there as well so you can learn more about the continuing saga here that Larry Smith writes about. Larry, great to know you. Thank you for doing this work and telling this story, and thank you for being with me today here on The Bottom Line.
Thank you very much, Roger.